Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast, Electrifying Mobility, the Race to Deploy Critical Charging Networks, produced by Power Grid International and Renewable Energy World and sponsored by Sitetracker. My name is Jen Runyon. I'm Senior Content Director for Power Grid and for our event Distributech. So before we kick off with our speakers, let me just quickly highlight a few important things. The presentation is live and interactive, and that means you can ask questions at any time by simply typing them into that question box. Feel free to use that same box if you encounter any technical difficulties. Now, to fully immerse yourself in today's discussion, we suggest closing any other applications that you have open right now. That way you can give your undivided attention to the valuable insights that you're about to hear. And last, we're offering a certificate of attendance today for all live attendees. It will be sent to attendees about an hour after the presentation ends. And then for your convenience, the presentation will be available on demand after the live event concludes. We'll send a reminder email to all registrants with a link to the archive once it's ready. And you'll also be able to find it on our websites, power-grid.com and renewableenergyworld.com. All right, with that out of the way, let me turn the presentation over to our moderator, Emily Openauer.
Thanks so much, Jen. I appreciate that. And again, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're at. We so appreciate you joining us in this great panel we have today. As Jen mentioned, the topic today is electrifying mobility, the race to deploy critical charging networks. So as we kick things off, give me one sec, make sure we're going through this study. Let's go over a couple of things. Jen just went over a couple of housekeeping items for us. We'll remind you of those. We'll talk about what's happening in the industry today, right? A little context and level setting for the discussion we're going to be having with our great panelists. I'll introduce those panelists, have them give a little more in depth about who they are, what company they represent, and where they fit within this EV charging ecosystem. And then we'll dive into some good, robust discussions back and forth. And don't worry, we'll absolutely leave time for Q&A at the end. So make sure you're submitting questions throughout, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible before our time concludes. So with that, a couple of just quick reminders of what Jen had just gone over. You will be automatically muted throughout the presentation. Again, submit those questions throughout. And if you do end up needing any help throughout today, whether it's a technical difficulty you're experiencing with the webinar platform, please just drop a note in the Q&A box and somebody will be helping you. So thanks for that. Now, in terms of our speakers today, just very quick intros on these folks. I will have them give more in depth over themselves, but thank you so much for joining us today. We have Alex Aguero, Senior Director of Customer Success over Energy at Sitetracker. We have Sandeep Jayaram, SVP of Infrastructure at EVgo, and then we have Wade Leipold, Executive Vice President at NTech Solutions. Thank you three for being here today. We cannot wait to have this discussion with you all. And let's dive into it, right? So ahead of diving in with our panelists, I'd love to just do a little context setting, right? I know I don't have to, share this. I'm preaching to the choir with this particular group that's going to be in attendance today, but all of us have been seeing globally a huge spike in electric vehicle sales. Most of that is being driven by China, the US, and Europe. But in 2022, we saw about 14% of all new car sales, so about 10 million being electric. And now within 2023, we're expecting to end the year at about 14 million. Now, for some of you, you might have seen that recently the International Energy Agency just released their new net zero report. And I believe the stat they were just sharing as of yesterday was that 1 in 20 cars over the last few years was electric, and they're expecting again to end the end of this year with 1 in every 5 cars being electric. And again, that's a global stat. Now here specifically in the US, we're definitely expecting to see this number continue to grow as well, right? US auto executives are predicting that about 50% of all domestic new car sales will be electric by the end of 2030. And just kind of wrapping our heads around that, it's massive, right? What a global shift, what a US shift in the way that consumers are purchasing vehicles as more and more options are becoming available and they're becoming more comfortable with this shift. But a big piece of that, of course, is the charging network. And so this is now, of course, where the focus is being shifted, is how can we deploy at speed, at scale, and at a sustained rate to ensure that there is a good and reliable charging network to meet this demand. Now, when you look at the current stats, S&P Global Mobility is estimating that we have about 140,000 EV charging stations across the US. And ultimately, if we're going to meet that demand that we just talked about that's being set for EV sales, we need to quadruple that number of charging stations by 2025. And ultimately, we need to expand it by about eightfold. So that's upwards of 1 million chargers by 2030. Now, doing that, no easy task. And I know that the panelists we have on today are going to be able to speak to some of those challenges and, of course, best practices to overcome those. But no easy task, right? Again, I think EV charging companies are looking for those types of solutions that can help them to do this, again, at speed, scale, and at that sustained rate. And of course, also considering things like reliability, quality, profitability at the end of the day. But everything from access to real estate and permitting to financing and having a workforce that can do the job to materials and interconnection. All of these are challenges that are facing organizations today. So with that, we have assembled this esteemed group of panelists to have a fantastic discussion around market dynamics, the challenges and opportunities that exist, and everything needed to ultimately deploy the charging stations necessary to make this vision of an electrified future a reality for the transportation sector. So with that, welcome, Wade, Sandeep, Alex. So happy to have you here today. Thank you for being here today. And I'd like to start by having each of you go around and briefly introduce yourself, your organization, and the role that you serve within the EV charging ecosystem. So Sandeep, let's go ahead and start with you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sandeep Jayaram. First of all, thank you to Sitetracker and this group to create awareness on this important topic. I'm also excited to participate with the other panelists here. I am the Senior Vice President at EVgo. I help support our groups of infrastructure engineering and global supply chain operations. That includes our DevEng, project engineering, utility grid integration, and also the supply chain functions where we help procure, design, customize our entire network. Prior to joining EVgo about 18 months ago, I spent about 21 years between Google and Facebook. I was helping run our infrastructure operations for both those companies. And I was continue to be amazed at the scale at which both those companies grew. And this is the thing that brought me over here primarily is one, the opportunity to build a brighter future from a climate perspective to the future generations, and also kind of learn from the unprecedented scale that I saw at Google in 2005 and at Facebook in 2015, and how that entire infrastructure was so important to build our own server networks and data center networks to support the unprecedented growth that we saw. So we are in the midst of a great wave of growth in the sector, and I'm excited and humbled to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Sandeep. Really I don't think there's any industry construction related business that's growing faster than EV charging. So absolutely an exciting one to dive into. Wade, why don't you give us an intro next?
Hello, thank you for having me. Wade Leipold, I'm Executive Vice President at NTech Solutions, responsible for our e-mobility team. Really looking at that from an end-to-end standpoint. So NTech Solutions, we're your energy partner, providing solutions from EV charging, solar battery energy storage, microgrid capability, all the way through capital management. Really excited to be here today. Obviously, a market that's been growing very, very quickly. I've been with NTech for just over 4 years. Prior to that, I was with General Motors for 23 years. So very excited about where the industry is going, how we continue to transform that, and look for a greener, brighter future.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Wade. And Alex, why don't you go ahead and round us out here?
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for being here. So I'm Alex Aguero. I'm Senior Director of Customer Success, focused within our energy vertical here at Sitetracker. I work primarily with utilities and alternative energy companies such as solar and EV charging, et cetera. But where Sitetracker plays within the EV space is deployment operations software focused on the full asset lifecycle for EV charging networks. So really supporting customers from the back office into the field. I've been at Sitetracker for approximately 8 years. I was the first 10 employee here really jumped from a medical device background, more in the IT space, into critical infrastructure and kind of the exciting evolution that's happening now with all different versions of green energy and alternative energy. So it's been an exciting ride, and focused mainly on the energy space over the course of the last 6 years and change at Sitetracker. So excited to be here with everybody and jump right into all the topics Emily has set up for us today.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, you guys. Really appreciate the great introductions there. And just quickly, I'll introduce myself because I'm realizing I didn't at the onset of this call. My name is Emily Obenauer. I'm a senior product marketing manager here at Sitetracker, focused on the energy vertical, and my background is across the energy and sustainability space, but so excited to be here and moderate this discussion with you all today. So let's go ahead and dive into that current state. So right at the onset of this, I did set up some of those. I threw out some stats, and you could either look at those as exciting or you could look at them as daunting, right? When we think about kind of the task at hand and what needs to be done here. So I'd love to have each of you go around and kind of give your own perspective on what's happening within the space and, what you guys see happening in that opportunity at hand. So Wade, why don't we go back to you and have you start with this one?
Excellent, thanks, Emily. Overall, extremely exciting. Industry, we're seeing a lot of rapid growth on all fronts, both public and private. It is interesting though, as we work with a lot of different customers and clients, they're at all different stages. Customers that are all in moving forward. You have a lot that are just testing the waters right now. What does an EV mean for their organization, potentially for their fleet? How do they operate business, and how does that change some of that? So they may be starting with a single vehicle and a single charger to kind of kick it off. But we also see a lot of challenges, and you brought some of those up, just a number of chargers that need to be deployed, and headwinds. We've all been working through supply chain issues over the past couple of years. Utility interconnection, how are we getting the power required at the right time in order to set up these charging stations, and even the distributions of grants and incentives. A lot of money that's talked about that's out there, but how that's actually being distributed and how each state is handling that on an individual basis. And just getting that aligned to ensure that we can really rapidly deploy stations and support both the public and private sector here.
Yeah, to your point, a lot of details to track to ensure you're doing things in the way that's required based on the funding that might be available. And I also think, right, interesting to hear that, we really are still seeing people across the spectrum in terms of sophistication on where they're at with this, right? Still some people who are just diving into it, but those that are a bit more sophisticated and later on. So that's great. Sandeep, why don't you go next? What's exciting you about this space right now?
Yeah, the confluence of scale that is unprecedented in this industry, combined with the evolution of the technology advancements that we have, and the overhaul of an industry that is traditionally a little bit more kind of in its cruise control mode. Say I'm talking about the gas station industry, etc. It's exciting. If you take a step back, you shared some stats where in the next 7 years, we have a CAGR of about 39% in the charging industry, EV charging industry. So 50% of the US vehicles are going to be electric by 2030. Almost all of the automobile manufacturers that we work with have a plan to sunset the internal combustion engine plant. So from, as Marabari said, from an automobile manufacturer perspective, the number of moving parts between an IC to a EV reduces by over 90%. So for them, it is a very easy decision of investing in this growth. Number two, it is much more safer. Yet the adoption rate is somewhat, if you ask somebody who's not gotten into an EV, even though they understand the benefits of it, is twofold. One is range anxiety. And two is kind of familiarizing yourself with how this whole ecosystem operates. And the range anxiety is driven by two factors. The first one is the battery technology needs to improve. So one of the reasons that we're not seeing the biggest sector of vehicles in EV, which is large SUVs, which is coming, by the way, which is the Escalades, the Suburbans, the 8-seaters, the minivans, which America runs off of, We don't see that in EV just yet because they're still working on improving the battery efficiency. What happens is at some point, you can easily pack more battery packs, but the weight of the battery itself becomes a drag on the vehicle. So you technically want bigger vehicles to hold more people and go to longer distances. But if the battery itself is a drag, you're not going to buy a 8-seater vehicle to go 150 miles. So efficiency of battery improvements is very important. All executives that I speak to in the automobile sector, they're investing heavily in improving the technology of the battery, and it's going to come out by end of 2024, 2025. A lot of the big vehicles that we're all eagerly waiting for. So that's a number one impediment for the range anxiety. Number two is availability of reliable charging stations.
Mhm.
So and that's where we make a play. It's exciting, everything that Wade just mentioned, from supply chain shortages to utility issues to funding, and one on top of that, in terms of education of the customer. So we have a general idea that when people stop thinking about, oh, where can I go charge my car, we have won the battle. It's organic, it's there, I plug it in, it simply works. So that's where it needs to go, and it will go. There's also going to be homogenization in this industry. We already saw earlier this year the alignment of NACS as our connector standard in the US is one good step forward. I'd say anybody in this industry, just have a healthy disposition of the impossible. We have an exciting road ahead of us, and we're glad to be a small part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, the range anxiety for sure is real. And as more and more options do come out, like you said, the efficiency of batteries for some of those larger cars, which thank goodness, as a mom of two, we got to have those bigger cars available soon. But yeah, then the range anxiety does absolutely come into play with it, and having the reliable charging network, like you said, those charging points that are up and ready to go and easy to use, so it can mimic more of the process that they've been used to in the past. So that's great. Alex, why don't you round us out a bit more here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think daunting to me equals exciting, right? It
Yeah.
means we've got a long road ahead of us. We've got a lot of excitement behind it. But one of the things that I feel like at times people don't necessarily really put all the pieces together, exactly what Sandeep and Wade just talked about, right? Like, what are all the different moving pieces that are needed to really be successful to hit all the numbers that you described on the onset, right? At face value, it's very simple. Just go out there and put a piece of equipment in the ground, right? But
Sure.
there are so many factors that ultimately affect the consumer market, which is, again, it's front and center in the space right now. And I think that, to me, is the most exciting part about being, working with different customers that are doing this type of work is we're the trendsetters right now, right? And you need to continue to innovate and evolve and get creative in order to be successful. And it's just a really exciting place to be right now.
Yeah, I love that. What a great way to put it, the trendsetters, as looking to these early wins and how things are getting rolled out as the models of success. That's fantastic. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and dive into those challenges a bit more. You've all kind of mentioned them in one way or another, with Alex just kind of rounding it out there, that could be seen as so easy, right? Just deploy some equipment, right? Get it out and operational. But you all kind of touched on various challenges at different points that you could encounter that are going to make this a very difficult process. So let's first start at the beginning around planning, and then we'll start to go into construction. We can go into preventative and corrective maintenance. But what challenges do you guys see in deploying charging infrastructure at scale, specifically when it comes to some of that upfront planning activity, like site selection, for example? Sandeep, I'm going to throw this one to you first.
Yeah, so it is not a simple answer in terms of what are the challenges that's there, but we can, from early planning onset, where site selection, there's a multitude of factors that we have to consider. For example, are we doing corridors? Are we doing site hosts? Are we doing the franchises? So let me say what that means and how it actually helps out. Corridors, meaning which we call them as our freeways, and you could technically plan to build charging stations across freeways, but the actual stopover time for a customer needs to be very, very less. 80% charge in 8 minutes is the metric that we all, because 8 minutes is roughly the amount of minutes that somebody spends at a gas station today. So the actual experience needs to be very similar. Then you talk about things like malls or things like franchises, things like in the middle of the city, where for again the different dwell times increase. So if somebody's going to a retail store, you don't want to charge your car in 10 minutes and you got to come back out and park the car somewhere else. So do you want to toggle it down a little bit more so that you have more dwell time? So from a planning perspective, what we have is a internally developed IP that helps us determine where the most benefit is, and we take into consideration about 28 different factors, from EV growth to adoption to ROI, because we're a public company, we have fiduciary responsibility for our shareholders. Where do we put where utilization will increase? Current utilizations are lower, but they're increasing on a 2x basis year over year, and purely because of the adoption. And we also have a huge support in the US by virtue of these grants that are coming, the NEVI, the BABA requirements. We have over $8 billion that have been allocated for charging infrastructure alone, which I think is the right thing, because it has to matter to the government, it has to matter to the people this is happening. So we're super excited about how do we utilize that precious funds, and there's requirements in terms of how much uptime and how much performance metrics that we owe when we get those fundings. So it's not as simple like we're going to go ahead and deploy for every funding that is in every county. We have to have an application and a commitment and a contract that in return gives us some level of funding. So again, the first challenge is around making sure we plan, but in no particular order, some of the other challenges that I believe we have are things that a CPO like us has, and we can solve, is how do you improve the experience of the actual end customer. It's again, we talked about homogenization of the entire experience from a hardware perspective. Do we have all singular cable lengths? Do we have the same connectors? Do we have, again, working with automobile manufacturer around where the inlet port needs to be in the vehicle? Today, you have some vehicles in the front, some vehicles on the left, some vehicles on the right. So being a public charging company, and that actually determines how long your cable length needs to be, and that determines the cost of the actual charger, and that then in turn determines how much we charge a customer. So a homogenization is not only efficient, but also it helps us standardize and it helps us scale. Things that are a little bit out of our control, but we're seeing a lot of positive response, is with the utilities, the permits, the AHJs, and we work with roughly about 150 different utilities. And since I've gotten here, we share something called a 5-year roadmap, and I meet with the C-level executives of my top 10 utilities, and they are all excited. They are now in California and the East Coast, they are now thinking about how do they even power the utilities. They see the wave that's coming. So the adoption is, of course, we're bookended in this country, and it's going to go into the middle of the country as well. But the utility and the requirements of the utilities to have the energization done on time is because it's expensive to build these charging networks. And if we have the charging networks built out and we don't have them energized on time, it is expensive asset sitting that is not returning ROI, and people cannot use it as well. And the reliability is something that the industry itself it's still in infancy in the grand scheme of things. They're improving, and the reliability will improve, not just from a hardware perspective, but also from a software perspective. And how do we have the software interfaces between the automobile and the charging networks, public charging networks as well, is highly important. And finally, there is an education piece. We have a very large call center, we have a customer service center, and I'd say a healthy portion of some of the calls and the tickets we receive is, how do I use this? Where do I swap my card? What do I do the Apple Pay? Where do I put is it safe to do this? So again, a lot of this could be solved by education, but also simplification of the experience, which is great. When I also work with customers who come to us, whether they're franchise customers or otherwise, they also need some level of education around what is the efficiency of and the power that they would potentially need. Again, we have to solve for tomorrow, can't solve for today. So
Right.
we cannot be installing 50 kilowatt or lower charging stations. We have to tell them, again, we have a study internally that says, okay, based on what you're projecting, this is the ideal size of a site that you would want, and this is the power per charger that we would recommend. So and it takes a little bit of an education curve for most of my customers, and they get there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say, like you mentioned at the onset of your response, right? There's a lot that goes into this. It's not an easy thing to do. So a lot to unpack within that, right? But I think what I'm hearing is you're an incredibly customer-centric organization, right? You're thinking about everything from what is that experience within the charging to how they're interacting with what's the software that allows it to be simple to use, to thinking about the future, not just planning for today. But also thinking through, right, contractual obligations and being able to track those effectively based on new funding mechanisms that are coming out, like NEVI funding, and being able to track that effectively to ensure that you're doing what you can and using those dollars effectively, as well as I heard you mention that complexity of the network that you work with, right? Lots of players involved when you're going through a massive scale deployment like this, and making sure that you kind of can have everyone in and working off the same song sheet, I'm sure, is highly important. So that's great. Thank you, Sandeep. I'm going to push us on to Wade. Would love to get your thoughts on, some of those upfront planning challenges.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with a lot of what Sandeep said there. It's really starts with planning, putting a plan together at first, sitting down with the customer, client, site host, and getting an understanding of what this looks like and how to move forward. Like Sandeep said, we utilize tools with our partners, understanding utilization and modeling. Where are we going to put chargers? What size chargers should we put in that particular location? Making sure they're not too big, not too small. What is that charging profile as consumers come up to charge their vehicles, and make sure they can get a timely charge in order to get on their way. I think another area that we didn't cover as much is really around the deployment of chargers. When you take a look at that full life cycle, you mentioned the number of chargers that need to be deployed, 1 million chargers. That's a huge number. To stick build all of that is a huge undertaking. Quite frankly, we don't have the resources within the states to take that on a stick build case. So as we're looking at this too, how do we do more and more manufactured solutions? And we're putting a rapidly deployable charging unit in place and not doing all the work on site. There's a lot of advantages to that as you look at it. It's less disruption for that site host or the client. We're on and off site much quicker. And you also get a higher quality overall installation. We're able to do a lot of that assembly within a climate controlled environment, do a lot of pre-commissioning, make sure that the chargers are up and running, really to get that quality deployment into the ground as soon as possible. So as we mentioned here, a lot to consider. It really working that upfront plan right away just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. It's a good quality install.
Thanks, Wade. Those are fantastic additional points. And Alex, I'd love to turn it to you. Anything else to kind of round this out from, your experience in working with other Sitetracker customers?
Yeah, and I think everything that was said resonates, to what I'm hearing for our customers. But just something to add is more the execution of the plan that they're referring to, right? And I think that's where I probably have the most insight from a technology standpoint is how are they doing that, right? How are they coordinating all the logistics that go behind the approvals, the permitting, negotiations, and in theory, yes, we have so many locations that the answer is yes, put one here. But in order to get to that final approval where you can start the work, there are just so many steps. And the planning side is step one. And if you trip on step one, it becomes difficult to hit step 2 and step 3. And it ends up putting a little bit of a burden on the remaining pipeline that's coming behind those projects and the individuals that are responsible for executing on them. So that to me, I think is the biggest challenge, if you will, on that initial process is once we've got it down and we know what we want to do, can we hit everything efficiently and effectively so that way that initial plan and forecast of when we're going to complete the work is within an acceptable range, right? Because things happen, things will get delayed. You're going to run into challenges. Whether it's with the supply chain, what else, all the different other factors. But ultimately, making sure that you're managing that work as efficiently as possible is so critical, especially at the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah, really making sure, to your point, that that upfront planning is solid, that you've built in some standardization, repeatability where you can, but allowed for some of that ad hoc that, right, you just can't predict, that you don't know when it's going to pop up. So absolutely. Well, I'd love, and all of you kind of went into some of the construction related challenges as well, right? But I'd like to just kind of maybe dive into that a little bit more with you, Sandeep. So would love to hear, are there any additional like construction specific challenges, thinking about the workforce that we have at hand, right? Like trained skilled labor to be able to go out and get these things up and operational, getting the right field crews, but right with the right assets at the right time, making sure that we're having as efficient of a construction process as possible. Can you speak to other construction related challenges that you guys have been seeing?
So I'd break that down into two different elements. One is we have a active network of about 2,500 chargers. So we work with national level partners, small regional partners, and what we've enjoyed so far is, we talk about collaboration soon, but what we enjoy is a very strong partnership with these specific companies who are also now, in the past 3-4 years, working with us, have been through the challenges of installing charging networks and what comes with it. The easement permits and the ADA requirements, and if you have to get the utility walkthrough after we put the transformers in, they put the transformers. So it's not traditionally like building anything else as its own. So there's an element of experience that can come only by working with companies like us or other CPOs. The challenge from a construction perspective is we have to balance the availability of, so for example, certain level of funding is only offered if we have unionized labor or prevailing wages and getting the unionized labor has competing priorities with other requirements those unionized electricians or construction crews have. So what we have to do is make sure that we secure that kind of labor ahead of time in order for us to be eligible for the funding. So there's this whole prevailing wage unionized requirements that is now becoming more and more important with the advent of funding that is required by the government. What we do with the contractor subcontractors, again, is do long-term planning, can lay it out for them what the next 2 to 3 years looks like ideally, and how do we plan ahead of time to have additional crews. And of course, just like anybody else on this call who's got customers, once we win a deal, the customers quickly has a very quick ramp. And so we have to balance out the preparation for what's coming before we actually win it, which also requires some investments on our side, investments on the customer side, on the contractor side. The second challenge that I have is, again, forecasting and making sure we hit the dates with the site host. And some of this is outside our requirements because of utility availability and also power to the utilities and how do they plan capacity. So when we say we work with utilities, it's not about I have X megawatts that I'm trying to deploy in this part of the country. It's more about we go one step deeper in trying to understand what is their own capacity expansion plans from a city, from a commercialization, from their own residential planning. All the major utilities have their bigger pipe capacity planning. And so we work with them on, because that has a long lead time. And so we have to be able to come together on what they think the right level of capacity availability for our charging networks. And if we have a issue, and we have a set of customers we call the fleet customers, where think of any fleet, large scale rental companies and whatnot, and those have large utility requirements. So how do we have the right level of, so the construction there becomes very important, because again, like I said, if we do everything, but then we're just waiting for the energization of the utility, we're just putting a bunch of stuff on hold, and that's a major construction challenge as well. But finally, the experience that every site host wants for their customer. We're very cognizant of that, whether we're going to a retailer, we're going to a grocery store, they're going to a corridor customer. What kind of experience do they want? Some people want canopies. Some people don't want canopies, for example. Some people want an experience center on the side. Some people don't want. So, and we are flexible, and we want to absolutely deliver the right experience beyond charging that site host wants for their customers. And so that also requires, sometimes throws in some construction challenges around where, so we do build by absolutely all the regulations that is in front of us. So ADA pathways need to be certain. You have to have pull-throughs in certain ways. And I have one or two customers I can't share because of confidentiality reasons, where they want angled parking. So how do you have an angled parking has its own challenges from the dispenser cable lengths. So it is fun. We take every challenge as how do we solve it, and how do we learn from it, and how do we set up for scale. Like I said, we have to kind of take into consideration all of this, because everything that they ask is usually makes sense. And so it's our job to provide a solution for it, and which so far we have.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think interesting, right? Like we're kind of bringing it back to that planning phase. I think to your maybe like at the foundational level, what I'm hearing from you is that the planning is where it really makes the difference, right? If there is the set planning that has been done very well with your customers, with your utility partners, that can make the construction process and ultimately getting those up and actually running, energized, through the utility,
Yeah,
can make it go very smoothly.
yeah, we have something called, in this world, CDs, or conceptual designs. We have CD 30, 60, 90, which is the percentile accuracy. We apply for permits at CD 90, but it's not 100%. But the permits and so we don't usually we have an idea of where the point of connection for the utility is, but then by the time we finish the construction, it takes us roughly about a year or two from scratch to operational.
Mm-hmm.
So if something changes between that time frame, then we have to re-engineer a bunch of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely not efficient in that way. Yeah. No, that's great. Wade, I'm going to push it on to you for the next question, just to, keep us moving here with the timing of things. So we've talked a little bit about the planning. We've talked a lot of it, I should say, about the planning, to be fair. We've talked about, construction. I'd love to hear from you, Wade, more about that post-install O&M, right? Because one of the things we've talked about throughout the conversation today is that consumer experience, right? The customer experience is, how are they going to be interacting with us and making sure that they have that reliable charging network? So can you speak a little bit about some of the, I don't know, challenges, opportunities that you've seen when it comes to post-install O&M?
Yeah, absolutely. And we did talk a lot about planning. I think it does start, though, again, with the planning, make sure that we do have that in place. In right from the get-go, and having that strong site assessment, understanding what risks are out there, how do we mitigate the risk, making sure the ADA lanes, Sandeep hit on this too, how do we have all that in place to ensure that we're creating that proper customer experience as this gets deployed. And then once we're post-commissioning, did we talk about future proofing ahead of time? Are we sizing things appropriately that we can add on additional chargers very rapidly in the event that those are needed? Just with the growth overall, I think that's where we're going to be seeing it. We're going to do some initial installs, and it's going to continue to grow from there. But I think one of the most important parts, you talk a lot about the software, is do you have service level agreements in place? Do you have charger management software in place? How are you taking a look at, giving that experience that the charger is always operational? Are you getting fault annunciations? What's the response time to those faults to make sure that, again, when the customer comes in, the charger is available? I've heard a lot of different stats. I think some up to 50% of charging stations out there are not operational. We've seen funding now coming out from the administration and replacing a lot of these stations. So I think just having those agreements in place, from a parts and material, remote diagnostics. You mentioned a little bit whether it's in an urban or rural setting. It takes time, obviously, in some of these rural settings. If we have to roll a truck and get there in order to fix it, how are you able to handle more and more of that remotely through diagnostics and then remote troubleshooting capabilities there? So in general, I think it's just really important to have that end-to-end plan there, and what is that going to look like post-installation, so that continue to support it.
Absolutely. Again, back to the planning piece, and I'm sure this will become more and more pressing as the network continues to build, as we see more EVs sold and become a greater part of our day-to-day lives, right? So that's fantastic. Alex, I'd love for you just to maybe round us out on both of those questions, right, across any other construction or post-install O&M from your lens of, deployment operations management.
Yeah, I think it's two different scenarios with very similar challenges, right? So I think a big part of it is fluidity of the communication going from the field to the back office for the construction side, right? We want to make sure that we're keeping things moving. We're aware of the risks, we're aware of the delays. Ultimately, the equipment's getting there on time, all that kind of fun stuff. You don't want to send somebody to, a site where you're not ready to begin work. And that's a critical component. The other side to that is I think Sandeep mentioned, right, controlling what you can't control or doing your best, right? You're dependent so much on outside entities that are going to determine whether or not you can get something up and running, right? You have DOTs you have to work with, you have utilities you have to work with. Those aren't within control of a lot of the folks building out the network. So that's something that is difficult to manage, but it's not going to go away, right? So managing it as efficiently as you possibly can is of the utmost importance, because if not, you're going to start missing those targets. And on the O&M side, it's dealing with the unexpected, right? I think there's the preventative maintenance, which is normal, and you're aware of that, and you've got some accepted risk at that point. But the corrective side, when things go wrong that you're not expecting it, you have a recall of a part or something like that, or there was an accident that took down your charger, and all of a sudden you need to get a truck roll out there. Do you have the right partners in place in those markets to be able to go and move quickly? And that's something that again, too often we oversimplify and say, hey, just get somebody there, but it's difficult, right? Wade alluded to the rural aspect of we've got some chargers that are out there. 50% of those chargers aren't necessarily up and running as a whole, and they're in rural areas. It takes longer to get there. Then you're coming back full circle with the charger uptime and that range anxiety. If I get there, will it be up and running? And that's scary for consumers. So managing that from an operations and maintenance standpoint becomes critical, right? It's at the end of the day, it's the reputation of the company who wants you plugging in, and the partnership and the collaboration of all of that is paramount in order to be successful, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And Alex, maybe I will build off of one of those last points here to move us into our next question, but it's collaboration, right? So again, this is a topic that I think has been very much sprinkled in throughout your answers today. But when we think about the number of parties, both internally and externally, that are involved in deploying out charging points, it's pretty massive, right? So internally, you can have your design teams, construction teams, you could have those maintenance crews, you might have third-party, vendors that you're working with in the field across all of the territories that you serve. You could have customers, utilities, property owners, it goes on and on, right? There's a lot of people involved in this. And I'd love to have you guys maybe share a little bit more about, what are some successful models you've seen used in the past, tools that you've seen used in the past. Alex, maybe I'll have you go first on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Collaboration is one of my favorite topics. It's something that you will hear me preach and talking to all of the customers that work with Sitetracker. I can't stress enough the value of this, right? You mentioned, I don't know, 10 maybe entities that could be involved. Every single time you add one, that's a variable that comes into play that can completely set something off the rails. So making sure that as many as you possibly can are in lockstep with you and your plan is going to be critical for the success of a large scale deployment, right? Seeing with customers that are looking to branch into new markets or extend their network and really trying to scale as a company. You can kind of get away with the email, you can kind of get away with the text message when you're in a smaller scale, but as you branch out, again, those variables come in, and those emails get missed, right? The email gets marked as read by accident, and now we're not talking about, hopefully we're not talking about weeks and months of delays to react to a piece of information, but even 1 to 2 days can have an exponential effect down the stream of the network as a whole, right? So I've heard different, stories of different teams using different systems, right? We have third parties. Can we get them in the same one? They're kind of comfortable in doing things the way that they are. But ultimately, if you're not communicating, efficiently and effectively, then, the decisions that you're going to be making are probably going to be off of either old data, stale data, old information, and being able to shift quickly in that innovation evolution, as we talked about at the beginning, is extremely important. One of my favorite things that I've heard recently is communication happening exclusively through WhatsApp group chats. That's tough, but that's what folks are kind of starting to use. Is they're just getting creative, and when you're working with third parties, they might see themselves as a small part of the larger process, but their delay could equate to delays down the line because you have such a small window to execute it on time, and you miss that window, it becomes very difficult. So that's a common thread that I'm seeing across everybody that's using Sitetracker, is that collaboration aspect is without that it becomes extremely difficult to be successful.
Yeah, and Alex, I think it's interesting, right? Because I mean, you bring up something like a WhatsApp. I think people are needing those tools, right, that can serve folks that are out in the field, those mobile applications, to allow them to stay connected and feed within the same pool of information that everyone has access to that needs it to be effective on a project, whether you are out in the field doing the work or you're on the executive team needing to better understand where projects sit and how profitable the organization is going to be moving forward. So really important there. I'd love to have Sandeep and Wade, you guys weigh in on this as well. From a collaboration standpoint, Sandeep, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think collaboration is the essential DNA that will help us succeed. You talked about WhatsApp. You talked about. It reminds me of a day back in the day when Google Maps was a 20-person project for an engineer in 2006, and now I don't think any of us can live a day without using Google Maps. And same with Gmail. Now, the reason I bring that up is I haven't been lucky enough to see some stupendous growth. The foundational requirement is that we had a strong set of partners, hardware, software, policy, etc., that were truly an extension of our team, and that's also what we're beginning to have here at EVgo. There's no, the entire industry is in its infancy. So we're not at a point where we're competing for zero sum in terms of allocation. We're still extremely in the startup phases. So the growth is great ahead of us. The only way we can succeed is if we all have a common measurement of success across every element of collaboration. We can't manage what we can't measure. So I said this to my team: you have to have measurements of success. How do you succeed with the partner? Small companies, a Sitetracker small company, we're a relatively small company. We have to continue to treat each other, which we do, as a true extension of each other's teams, and collaborate heavily, seek feedback, seek constructive feedback, see where we can fix. Hindsight is 2020. And we're lucky enough to have some really strong partners across the board that are conflating in this space, whether it's construction partners. I have some incredible hardware partners. We have some great partnership with Sitetracker and some SaaS partners as well. It's important. We cannot do anything without collaboration at this point. In fact, we even collaborate with our customers, the automobile manufacturers, in certain instances, even with our own competition, because we want to learn the best practices across the board and move things forward. The homogenization of NACS in the US, we feel it's an amazing step forward for the entire industry, and all of us are going to benefit from that. So collaboration plays in many ways, and I think what we're lucky again here is we're collaborating in a positive way to raise the platform for the entire experience for our country, and that doesn't happen every day, and we have the opportunity in front of us in this industry.
Absolutely. What a great rallying cry. And Wade, I'd love to have you maybe add some additional points there.
Yeah, just an overall agreement and everything that's said here. Collaboration is, if you want success, how do you collaborate? And thankful for Sitetracker, we use it every single day, a major part of our platform as we move forward, integrating with our customers and partners, really defining roles and responsibilities right up front so everyone knows when they need to perform and what they need to perform and how it needs to be performed and what those expectations are. Follow that up with, we talked about WhatsApp and other means of communication and simple cadence meetings, making sure you're meeting on regular basis again and again with all those stakeholders to hold each other accountable. But at the end of the day, having that software platform out there that makes it very visual, having a dashboard that people can see at any moment where the sites are, where corridors are, etc., is extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey guys, so I'm recognizing we're in the last maybe 10 minutes here, so we're definitely charging through questions, but just to bring us to one that I think is really at the core of the discussion today. And Wade, you kind of just went into this, right? Overall, as like software supporting business, I think technology as an accelerator overall is at core of the conversation today. So I would love to like maybe quickly here, and then we can move into some audience questions. I'd love to just hear any other thoughts on how is technology ultimately and software ultimately helping to accelerate your businesses, right? Wade, maybe any additional points from you first.
Yeah, I mean, from the very onset, we talked about assessments. There's many ways to do some of those assessments and do them at scale and rapidly. Are we taking a look at drone capability, etc.? You move into collaboration and the software behind that, just developing the overall plans and integrating with our customers and sharing those plans back and forth, tracking throughout the progress of the deployment then through the Sitetracker maps or Sitetracker platform, moving into post-op in when we're getting into charger management software and having service level agreements in place. So every step of the process here is really very, very dependent on software and having the proper software at the right time in order to support it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like definitely across the spectrum, right, of activity that's happening, it's going to accelerate what you're doing. Sandeep, thoughts from you?
I think this is kind of stating the obvious. We do need a seamless experience, customer experience, and that can only happen with with a easy to use, easy to track, easy to provide insight software, and not just talking about the app and the software that goes behind inside the charger to the back of the cloud. When I say software, that actually touches every aspect of how do we run the enterprise internally. How do you work with construction readiness for companies like Sitetracker? Of course, the front-end software where it gives us the seamless customer experience, super important. We view this as a entire a tech platform and a tech stack that is combined with the infrastructure. Very, very similar concepts from my past life around where the hardware feeds the software, feeds the customer. So it's important.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Alex, any other thoughts from you to kind of round that out?
Yeah, all of the above, double stamp on it all. Ultimately for me, I'm here to support folks making correct decisions as quickly as they possibly can, right? And you can't do that if the system is hard to use. You want to make sure that you're capturing data accurately and as real time as possible, right? And how do we relieve some of the burden from the end users, the folks out in the field? Can we automate, those closeout packages and handover packages to our customers? Can we automate, some of the notifications where we can then come in and tag the next group and let them know, hey, you're up to do some of this work and reduce some of that communication time. But that's all driven through software, right? That's going to allow you to reduce your cycle time. It's going to make you, get to that construction faster. You're going to be able to reduce costs. You're going to make your employees happier, and be able to retain them in a world where the workforce is tough to come by right now. So reducing that rework, reducing those truck rolls, it's all at the hands of technology, and it's going to be a vital part of progressing this forward.
Absolutely. Here. Okay, well, I'm going to reshare my screen here, people. Hopefully we can see that. We are going to jump into Q&A. I recognize we only have a few minutes left. Thank you all to you who have submitted questions so far. Please know that if we don't get to your question, we will follow up and answer that. One of the panelists will get back to you, so please know that. Looking through some of the questions that have been answered, let me see if I can get through one or two here. So maybe one around funding, guys. So funding financial models, right? And this actually came up quite a bit today, I feel like, from you guys in terms of some of the obligations and requirements around some of the funding that's coming out, some of the NEVI funding, for example. And so I'd love to just hear, maybe Sandeep, I feel like you actually touched on this quite a bit today. Any other thoughts from you around, it looks like opportunities, tracking obligations within the funding, best practices of doing that? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, we're still early in terms of doing these applications. We had a few success along the way, and from my perspective, the best practices so far, again, this is going to evolve, is uh, being absolutely accurate in your documentation that goes in, and just some of the guidance that usually comes from the government are not intentional, but they're vague. So what we have a pretty impressive policy team. So we go back and clarify what it actually means, and we also retain internal and external attorneys to help understand what the intent of an application requirement from a government entity looks like. And we iterate, launch and iterate, and then we have to show that we are absolutely trying to abide by the requirements that is put forth, and doing that time and again is the best practice, to be honest, at a high level.
Yeah.
The data always works. Follow up of the data, for example, some of the NEVI requirements happen over 99%, 97% of uptime, and so we have data that shows that we're able to do that. And so when we do go to a specific site that is given funding by NEVI, we have the past precedent that can help us convince that this is the right body to give the funding to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And hey, one other question quickly, you guys will get to. Wade, maybe you can take this one for us. And it's kind of actually back to that collaboration piece. So we got a question in here around how responsive are local utilities to requests for new charging station service. So would love to hear any other thoughts on that. How responsive have they been? Maybe you could also add in, are there any other like best practices for how you're working with them?
Yeah, variable. Depends where you are within the country. We've had some very responses, very quick responses with some utilities, and some take quite a bit longer. And I think it really depends on how many requests they're having come in. Obviously, the West Coast is seeing quite a bit of this, and there's a lot of activity out in California. You move more towards South Central, and they seem to be a little bit more responsive right now. I think one of the best practices is really developing those relationships as soon as possible. We have a number of relationships with those utility providers, and also that the customer or client or that site host that is going to potentially own and operate. What relationships do they have, and can they use to help really drive that timeline there for utility interconnection?
That's great. Hey guys, okay, I think that is really all the time we probably have today to get through, but I want to thank all of our audience members quickly and say thank you for all of the fantastic questions that were submitted. We still have many that we did not get to, so please know we will get those. And for all of you, if you have a question, go ahead and submit it now. We will get those later. I do just now want to say thank you so much to this wonderful group of panelists, Alex, Sandeep, Wade. It has been a wonderful conversation with you this morning, very enlightening, and man, a lot of excitement, but a lot of also challenges and opportunity ahead of us. So thank you so much to all of you listening. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about Sitetracker and what we're doing to support leaders in EV charging deploy what's next, please reach out to us to schedule a personalized demo today. And thanks so much for the time.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you again to Emily, who did a fantastic job moderating this really important discussion, super important. Thanks so much to Sitetracker and to you, our audience, for hanging out with us. Powergrid.com and renewableenergyworld.com will archive this presentation, and all registrants will receive a reminder email with a link to the archive. Thanks again for watching today, and we'll see you in the future with more webcasts. Have a great day, everybody.